Hello and welcome everybody once again to Burning Bridges. I'm Søren here, and today I'm joined by Vince from the Team USA from Texas. Today we're going to talk about list building, and I thought that we should get an expert, so you're not just going to listen to me and my ramblings, but Vince, why should we listen to you? Why, have you won anything?
I won LVO twice with a perfect score. I've placed top 3. I've won Southern Nationals. I've won a couple Team Yankee events. I played competitive 40K and won Feast of Blades, placed top 8 at LVO. I'm pretty good at tabletop gaming.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I'm looking forward to hearing your advice. So playing Flames of War, what do you do when you normally go about to build a list? How is do you pick a fun unit, or how does it start? What do you
I start with a
looking at?
concept. I decide, okay, I want to attack. And then I build on that concept, say, okay, I want to attack with infantry, or I want to attack with mounted infantry, or I want to attack with tanks.
Okay.
Uh, I'm known for attacking with infantry, mostly in the US, so my happy place is a armored infantry list that I can move quickly with.
Okay. So the play styles, the armored infantry, that must have any influence on which nation you're going to pick? Do you have a favorite nation? Is it always the same, or do you switch between, or
I
how does it
change
go?
the list depending on, how much I've been playing it and how bored I am with it. When I'm playing armored infantry, it'll be Germany. They're the only nation that can attack in their half tracks, which gives them a diversity that the other nations just don't get.
Yeah. So you mostly go about with the Germans when attacking. So when I build a list, I tend to look at the different threats I'm going to face. Like I'm going to face guns or infantry or light tank, medium tanks, heavies, and then I try to figure out something that can fight that. How do you do? Do you just say I'm just going to push everything against my opponent, and then he's going to deal with that, or how do you
So I look
put
at what
together
I
your
want to
list?
do instead of what my opponent wants to do. I say, okay, I want to attack with infantry. Well, how do I do that? I'm going to need smoke. So I make sure I have a battery of smoke. I need to stop tanks. So I find a way to stop tanks. In recent years, it's been the double 88 battery because it can dominate an open table. And if not, it's 2 more extra bombardments.
Yeah. So when there's two more bombardments, is that Bulge or Berlin?
Bulge with Volks 88s and the von Svoboda 88s.
Okay. So when you're sitting and building your lists, I suppose you consider which missions you're gonna
Uh,
play. Like,
it
or do you
depends if
just
I'm.
build to
Sorry?
face any mission, or when you say you're gonna attack, or some tournaments have restrictions on how many times you can use a certain stance. That's going to influence which missions you're going to face and stuff like that. So, will that have influence on how you build it?
Definitely. If it's a open event, then I adjust what I add to my initial framework. So if I'm attacking with armored infantry for an open event, I think, okay, I need to be able to defend as well. The 88s help with that, but what else do I need to defend? Do I need an ambush unit if I have to pick defend twice? What's a good ambush unit? If I'm going to have reserves, do I find an ambush unit that'll work as reserves? So you have to look at those elements to the list.
Yeah. So you pick some of the units can do multiple things. You don't go say the 88s can only do one thing, or you could have you could put some anti-tank that could be mobile, so it could both be your ambush unit and your reserve unit. Are there other units, like you have a favorite, you have a preference for running the 88s? Are there anything else that you normally would take?
I look at points efficiency. The Berlin Sturmhubitze are so cheap for what they do, it's hard to not take them. I look at playstyle. A lot of people like the drillings, but I don't enjoy them because of their lack of survivability. They're too easy to wipe out in a bad turn. So I tend to look for things that can have multiple roles, which is why I like infantry, because I can attack with infantry, I can defend with infantry, I can move quickly in the transports, I can ford up. It'll do more than one thing. So I want the most for my points.
Okay. So when building infantry armies, are you one of the guys that swear to only 2 platoons, or do you go 3 or 4, or do you go short, or do you go full platoons?
It really just depends on what I'm doing with the list and what the points for the tournament are. If I'm playing Fearless Veteran Infantry, it's hard to fit more than 2 platoons, but I try. I always like having at least 3 platoons of infantry because as an attack player, I get a lot of meeting engagements. When people see me, they say, "Oh, it's Vince, I'm going to attack," so he has to defend an objective. But if I have 3 platoons, I can put 1 on each objective and go after them with a third.
Okay. So some players, when they build a list, decide I'm gonna play to win. Most people, of course, do that, and then they take the cheapest unit they can find. Do you go that way and say I want to win and I take the cheapest units, or do you take a unit and say what's the strength of this unit? Like when you look at your armored infantry, or if you're looking at the Sturmhowitzer, do you look at it and say, okay, the strength of this is it can bombard and it's hard to kill. How can I use that?
Yes, definitely. I look for more than just how many cheap units can I put out there. I want units that can assault. I want units that are hard to hit. I'm not a player that'll put 50 million different models on the table just because I can put a lot down. I want units that are going to perform reliably for me time and time again.
Okay, that's interesting. So your list is not only the cheapest units you can find. You take less optimized units, and then because they fit into your list puzzle, they're going to perform better. The sum of the units will be greater than the single units. Is that the basis of your list building?
I tend to look at it, is it an optimal unit because it's cheap, or is it an optimal unit because it's good for the points it costs? So
Yeah,
I won't take the cheapest unit, but I'll take a cheap unit that does a lot for how much it costs. Like the D-Day infantry is cheaper than the Bulge and the Berlin infantry because it only has 1 Panzerfaust. So if I only need 1 Panzerfaust, why will I pay for the second one?
Yeah, okay. That's a smart thing. So I asked you to prepare a list we could go through so we could see in practice how
Okay.
how your theories go. So I'll throw it up on the screen here. Yeah, I'll switch to your list here. So
Okay.
what can you tell us about your list here? We can see it's a Bulge German list.
So it's designed to attack with. I started on the basis of having a lot of artillery is always a nice thing. It lets me move forward in front of guns. It lets me move forward in front of infantry. It gives me the dual purpose 88 since they count as artillery, but I can also control a good portion of the table for the points they cost. It's hard to find a better investment in the German book. You're looking at 19 points for 8 AT-14 or higher guns that can also fire bombardments.
Yes, that is cheap.
Then moving from there, I decided, okay, I'm attacking with infantry. I need 2 units of infantry that can move forward. They're veteran, but I can also leave on an objective. The Clausewitz Panzersturm Company is cheap. It has veteran infantry for a low cost. And it lets me pick up more Stummels, which are always great for dealing with those pesky British lists that have 15 million half-tracks. The second formation is the Bulge formation, is Kampfgruppe Knittel, or Schnellgruppe Knittel. It's cheap. It lets me get a smoke bombardment for 4 points. It lets me get more of those beautiful Stummels, and it gives me scout in the formation. It also has one of my favorite units, which is the Ardennes SS Reconnaissance Platoon.
Yes.
They're fearless aggressive, but since the half-tracks have scout, they're basically veterans moving across the table as long as you position them correctly.
Yeah, so you're utilizing that they got scouts and the infantry doesn't, so you can get all up and close and personal without being hit on threes.
Exactly.
At the close. So, are there any thoughts about running 2 formations? Is it
with this list running 2
yeah,
formations works well?
Do you do you always go 2 formations if you can?
No. If I'm playing my Americans and I'm playing tanks, then I usually only go with one strong Sherman formation. If I'm playing Italians, I go with two formations because they're cheap. If I'm playing Russians, I go with one very large formation because it's easy to just cram so much into one formation. It really depends on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to do it with.
Okay, so the reason you use two here is because it's possible, and of course you get the benefit of the double HQ, because in the case of Schnellgruppe Knittel, you could almost take the same units in reserve. No, not reserve, support, right? It's only the, what is it? The Stummels you wouldn't be able to get. You could take the scout cars, you could take the SS reconnaissance platoon, you could
But I
take all of
couldn't
it.
get the armored mortars, which is
No.
actually a key part of this list because it's the only smoke bombardment in the list.
Ah.
So that
When you, sorry?
go ahead.
I was thinking when you started building this list, which were your start formation? Did you start by going to the SS Schnellgruppe Knittel, and then
I
you
start
see
with
I
Knittel.
can, okay,
Um,
and then the Clausewitz Panzersturm Company is just an add-on.
yes, it's replaceable. Replace it with a D-Day SS company or a Ardennes Armored Panzer Grenadier company, just depending on what I'm feeling at the time. This variation is a little bit better against infantry because of the drillings and the Sturmhubitze. But if I'm expecting more armor or I want more quality assault units, I'll use one of those other two formations.
Okay, cool. So when we look at your list here, I often say that people should build the list with reserves in mind. So is that something you do, or how do you go about if you end up in reserves with this list? What would you put in reserve?
This list is difficult for reserves because it's completely dependent on who I'm playing against.
Okay.
If I'm playing an infantry player and they don't have any heavy tanks, then the 88s go in reserve because there's not a whole lot of use for them right away. If I'm
Okay.
playing a tank player, then I have to look at what else I have. But it's
So you go, yeah.
good.
So you go about having very changeable reserves. So you don't do the standard two King Tigers, for example, always in reserve, which is a common sight. So you make them flexible. So depending on what you're facing, as you say, you can just mix and match. Is that something you do always, or do you sometimes take a specific unit and say, okay, my Tiger ones, a platoon of 3, they're going to be my main reserve part, or do you always build them so you can change the building blocks along the way depending on your opponent?
I usually build it to where I can move pieces around. That way it's more adaptable to my opponents.
Okay.
I don't like having 40% of my list in one unit because if that unit doesn't show up or if it dies, then I'm in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So looking at your list and the things you needed to be able to deal with heavy tanks, light tanks, infantry. So what your main anti-tank weapons here are, of course, the 88s, and they can dual purpose against medium tanks, light tanks, and heavy tanks. And if you're going to put them in reserves, then you are completely relying on your Stummels and your Panzerfaust, or how do you see that? Is that something that does it influence at all? Because now you have two units. The 88s are going to be your main anti-tank units, right?
So I look at my opponent and I look at his list and I think, okay, there's nothing in this list with higher than front armor 4. I don't need the 88s. I have 12 Stummels and I have double
Yeah.
Panzerfaust and 3 infantry units. I look at his list and say, okay, he's got one unit with front armor 6. Maybe one battery of 88s goes on the table, the smaller battery or the bigger battery. I look at his list and say, this is the old Russian Churchill list. Okay, all the anti-tank goes on the table. The Stummels go in reserve. The artillery goes in reserve because they won't do anything to Churchill's. So it really just depends on what I see
That's
in their list. That's back to that. I have all of
yeah.
those building blocks, and it's making the right picture out of the blocks.
Yes. So it's not only sitting at home and building the perfect list. You're building a list that can be adjusted depending on the opponents, which is, I find it very interesting to see that you can do it that way. So you don't. So what about your battle plan? Do you have like one battle plan saying I'm attacking with this, and then you just do the same thing in every game, or do you adjust it along the way? Depending on the mission, some missions you have to wait turn 6. Will that influence how you play the game compared to if you can win straight away?
It depends on the mission, and it depends on the event. If I have to pick maneuver and defend, then I have to outguess my opponents at that point, and the list changes a little bit. We make more concessions to speed and a little bit less heavy anti-tank. If I can choose whatever stance I want, then with this list, it's always attack. I consider defending against Churchills, but then I think, well, if I attack and he attacks, Churchills don't defend objectives well. I'm faster than him, and we both have reserves. So that's, if I was to build a list to defend with, it would have a much different construction. Maneuver lists have much different construction. So this is my go-to move is attack. So this is an attack list that does what it does very well.
Very good. Well, Vincent, thank you for taking time off and sharing your list building insights with us here at Burning Bridges. I hope to see you on again when we find another subject we could discuss. So thank you for coming.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.